The doctor's daughter was in a wheelchair, until the maid did the impossible. Margaret Johnson watched silently as little Sophia sat in her wheelchair, staring out the window with that empty expression that would break anyone's heart. After 2 years working as a housekeeper in Dr. Richard Mitchell's elegant Beverly Hills home in Los Angeles, she had grown accustomed to the quiet routine of a house that once overflowed with joy. But it was on that Tuesday morning when Margaret noticed something that made her heart race. While organizing books on the shelf near Sophia's usual spot, she saw the girl subtly wiggle the toes of her left foot. The movement was slight, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Margaret pretended not to notice, continuing her chores while watching from the corner of her eye. "Sophia, sweetheart, would you like me to open the window for you?" Margaret asked gently as she approached. The 9-year-old merely nodded, her eyes still fixed on the street outside. Her curly hair tumbled loosely over her shoulders, framing a face that had once glowed with happiness, but now carried a sadness too deep for someone so young. Margaret opened the window and sat in the armchair beside her. She knew Dr. Richard was at the hospital, as always. Ever since Sophia had lost the use of her legs after that terrible car accident 4 months ago, the renowned doctor seemed to bury himself even deeper in his work, as if staying away could make reality disappear. "You know what, Princess?" Margaret said, her voice warm with affection. "I brought some new storybooks today. How about we read together?" For the first time in days, Sophia turned her head, her brown eyes meeting Margaret's. For a moment, the housekeeper caught a glimpse of the cheerful child she had met on her first day in that house. "Aunt Maggie." Sophia's voice was small, barely a whisper. "Daddy said I'll never walk again." Margaret's heart clenched. She knew Dr. Richard well enough to understand he was a practical man, sometimes too blunt. As a neurosurgeon, he was used to dealing in medical facts, but perhaps he had forgotten he was speaking to his own 9-year-old daughter. "Listen, my love." Margaret knelt beside the wheelchair. "Your daddy is a very smart doctor, but you know what I've learned in life. Sometimes miracles happen when we least expect them." At that moment, Margaret saw it again. Sophia's right foot moved, ever so slightly, but it moved. The housekeeper masked her excitement, but inside her heart soared. Something was happening here, something the doctors might have missed. In the weeks that followed, Margaret began watching Sophia more closely. Whenever the girl thought she was alone, small movements would appear, a toe twitching here, an ankle turning there. It was as if Sophia's body was trying to wake up, but something was holding it back. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, Margaret made a decision. Dr. Richard had called to say he'd be late, and Sophia was unusually quiet, gazing at the garden through the living room windows. "Sophia, how about we play a little game today?" Margaret asked with a smile as she approached. "What kind of game, Aunt Maggie?" "Remember when you were tiny and we used to play foot massages? Your mum always said you loved that." The mention of her mother made Sophia's face tighten slightly. Jennifer Mitchell had died in the same accident that left Sophia in a wheelchair, and the subject was still too painful for the whole family. "Sorry, sweetheart," Margaret quickly corrected herself. "I just thought maybe a foot massage might do you good. How about it?" Sophia hesitated for a moment, but then nodded yes. Margaret carefully removed the girl's shoes and began massaging her feet with gentle, loving motions. To her surprise and joy, she felt a slight response in the muscles. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, "Aunt Maggie," Sophia suddenly said, "I can feel that." "Feel what, my love?" "Your hands on my feet. I can feel them." Margaret nearly let her tears escape but held them back. If Sophia could feel, it meant there might be hope. Maybe the doctors had been wrong, or perhaps the girl's body was healing little by little. From that day on, Margaret created a secret routine. Every afternoon, when Dr. Richard Mitchell was at the hospital, she did small exercises with Sophia, disguised as play and massages. The girl began responding more and more, and Margaret saw not just physical movement but a change in the child's eyes. "Aunt Maggie," Sophia said one afternoon, "do you think if I get better, my daddy will be happier?" The question struck deep in Margaret's heart. She knew Dr. Richard Mitchell was suffering just as much as his daughter, but in a different way. The man blamed himself for the accident, blamed himself for not being able to heal his own child, blamed himself for not knowing how to handle their new reality. "Your daddy is already happy just seeing you, Princess," Margaret replied, "but I'm sure he'd be overjoyed if you got better." "Then let's keep doing our secret games," Sophia said with a smile Margaret hadn't seen in months. The weeks passed and Sophia's progress was remarkable, at least to Margaret's watchful eyes. The girl could move her toes more easily, felt the massages more clearly, and even showed signs of regaining sensation in her legs. But something worried Margaret. Sophia only showed these improvements when they were alone. In her father's presence, the girl became apathetic again, as if a curtain had fallen over her emotions. It was during a conversation with Mrs. Thompson, the elderly neighbor who lived next door, that Margaret began to understand the situation better. "That girl doesn't walk because she doesn't want to," Mrs. Thompson said, sipping coffee in Margaret's kitchen during her Sunday break. "What do you mean, Mrs. Thompson?" "Honey, I see everything from my window. That man barely looks at his daughter. Ever since his wife left, he's thrown himself into work so much that it's like Sophia has become invisible to him." "But he loves his daughter," Margaret defended. "Of course he does, no one's saying otherwise. But loving and knowing how to show love are two different things, dear. That child lost her mother, and on top of that, she feels like she's lost her father too. Maybe she's decided that if she can't walk, at least she'll have his attention." Mrs. Thompson's words echoed in Margaret's mind for days. Could the neighbor's wisdom be right? Could Sophia, without realizing it, be using her condition to keep her father close, even if it was through worry and guilt? The following week, Margaret decided to test a theory. During one of their secret exercise sessions, she asked Sophia, "Princess, can I ask you a kind of hard question?" "Sure, Aunt Maggie." "Do you feel like your daddy loves you?" Sophia stopped moving in her chair, and her eyes filled with tears. "I think he stays with me just because he has to," the girl answered. "If I could walk, maybe he'd leave too, just like Mommy did." Margaret Johnson's heart broke. There it was, the raw, painful truth. Sophia wasn't just battling a physical injury. She was fighting the fear of being abandoned. The little girl had formed a painful association in her mind. As long as she needed care, her father would stay by her side. "My sweetheart," Margaret said, holding Sophia's small hands. "Your mommy didn't leave because she wanted to. She left because God needed her in heaven. And your daddy, even if he doesn't always show it, loves you more than anything in this world. How can you be so sure? Because I see the way he looks at you when you're not paying attention. I see how worried he gets, how he cries alone in his office when he thinks no one's watching." Sophia stayed silent for a long moment, processing Margaret's words. "Aunt Maggie," she finally said, "do you promise that if I get better, you won't leave too?" "I promise, my princess, and more than that. I'll be here to help you and your daddy be happy again." From that day on, Sophia's exercises took on new meaning. They weren't just about physical recovery anymore. They were about rebuilding trust, about learning to believe in love again. Dr. Richard Mitchell, meanwhile, remained buried in his work at the hospital. As the chief neurosurgeon at one of Los Angeles' most respected clinics, he spent up to 14 hours a day operating, studying cases, and seeing patients. It was his way of coping with grief, and his way of running from the guilt eating him alive. In his mind, he had failed as both a father and a doctor. He hadn't protected his family in the accident, hadn't saved his wife, and now he couldn't heal his own daughter. Every successful surgery at the hospital felt like a cruel irony. He could restore mobility to strangers, but not to Sophia. Then, on a Friday evening, everything began to change. Dr. Richard came home earlier than usual, planning to have dinner with his daughter, something that rarely happened. As he approached the living room, he heard voices and laughter. Curious, he peeked through the slightly open door and froze at the sight before him. Sophia was trying to stand up from her wheelchair, supported by Margaret's hands, and she managed to stay on her feet for a few seconds before sitting back down. "That's my girl," Margaret said, beaming. "Oh, you're getting stronger every day." Aunt Maggie, I think I stood longer today than yesterday, Sophia replied with a smile. Dr. Richard was hit with a wave of emotion so intense it nearly knocked him over. Shock, joy, but also anger. How had Margaret kept this from him? How had she achieved what his entire medical team had deemed impossible? He stepped into the room with firm strides, and the mood shifted instantly. Sophia quickly settled back into her chair, and Margaret turned wide-eyed. "What's going on here?" Dr. Richard asked, his voice controlled but tense. "Doctor, I can explain," Margaret began. "Then explain. Explain how my daughter, who, according to every test and specialist, has no chance of walking again, was just standing a moment ago." Sophia started crying softly, and Margaret immediately knelt beside her chair to comfort her. "Daddy, don't be mad at Aunt Maggie," Sophia said between sobs. "She was just helping me." "Helping how, Sophia?" Dr. Richard knelt in front of her. "Tell me everything." With a trembling voice, Sophia told him about the massages, the exercises disguised as games, how she'd been feeling more in her feet, how she could move her legs when she tried hard enough. Dr. Richard listened in silence, his heart racing. As a doctor, he knew spontaneous recoveries happened, but they were rare. As a father, he was torn between hope and the fear of being disappointed again. "Margaret," he said, turning to the housekeeper, "why didn't you tell me about this?" "Doctor," Margaret took a deep breath, "I tried to bring it up a few times, but you were always so busy, so tired, and I didn't want to give false hope." "False hope?" His voice rose a pitch. "Margaret, you're playing with very delicate feelings here. My daughter has been through tremendous trauma, and feeding hopes that may not come true is extremely dangerous." "But Daddy," Sophia interrupted, "I really feel my legs. It's not a lie. It's not my imagination. I can feel them." Dr. Richard Mitchell looked at his daughter, then at Margaret, then back at Sophia. His doctor's mind was at war with his father's heart. "Sophia, here's what we'll do," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "Tomorrow, I'll schedule new tests for you. We'll see what's going on, okay?" The girl nodded, but Margaret sensed something had broken in that moment. The atmosphere of trust and hope she had built with Sophia was being threatened by her father's skepticism and distrust. That night, after Sophia had gone to bed, Dr. Richard called Margaret into his office. "Margaret, I need you to understand something," he said, sitting behind his desk piled with medical books. "My daughter has been through a devastating trauma. The tests showed spinal cord damage. Several specialists confirmed the diagnosis. Feeding false hope could cause more psychological harm than good." "Doctor, with all due respect," Margaret stood her ground, "I know you're a brilliant doctor, but I also know what I've seen. Sophia is improving. Maybe the doctors were wrong, or maybe she's healing naturally. Margaret, medicine doesn't work on maybes, it works on facts, on evidence. And the fact is, your daughter stood up today, Doctor. The fact is, she feels the massages on her feet. The fact is, she's happier than I've seen her in months." Dr. Richard sighed deeply. Part of him desperately wanted to believe Margaret was right, but his medical experience kept him from surrendering to that hope. "Look, Margaret, I'll schedule the tests. If there's really any improvement, they'll show it. But until then, I need you to stop these exercises. I don't want Sophia getting hurt or disappointed even more." "Doctor," Margaret tried to argue. "That's an order, Margaret. No exercises, no promises, no feeding hopes. Is that clear?" Margaret nodded reluctantly, but deep down she knew she couldn't just give up. Sophia was making progress, and abandoning it now would be a terrible setback for the girl. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. The days that followed were tense in the Mitchell household. Dr. Richard scheduled a full battery of tests for Sophia: MRI, CT scans, neurological evaluations, assessments with specialized physical therapists. While they waited for the results, Margaret followed the doctor's orders and stopped the secret exercises. The effect on Sophia was immediate and devastating. The girl slipped back into the apathetic state of months before, spending her days staring out the window with no interest in anything. Worse still, she began avoiding conversations with Margaret, as if blaming the housekeeper for revealing her progress to her father. "Aunt Maggie," Sophia said one morning, her voice heavy with sadness. "Daddy said I'll never walk again, didn't he?" "He didn't say that, sweetheart," Margaret tried to comfort her. "He just wants to be sure through the tests." But if the exercises were good, why did he tell her to stop? Margaret Johnson didn't know how to respond. How do you explain the complexities of medicine, fear, and overprotection to a 9-year-old? The following Thursday, Dr. Richard Mitchell received the test results. His secretary handed him the sealed envelope, and he felt his hands tremble slightly as he opened it. The results were puzzling and, in a way, extraordinary. The spinal cord injury was still there, but there were signs of neural regeneration that hadn't appeared in previous exams. Even more intriguing, sensitivity tests showed positive responses in areas that had been completely dormant before. Dr. Richard read and reread the results 3 times before calling the neurologist in charge of the tests. "Dr. Williams, this is Richard Mitchell. I received my daughter's test results and need some clarification." "Ah, Dr. Mitchell. I was expecting your call. The results are truly fascinating." "How so?" "Well, technically the injury is still present, but there's neural regeneration we didn't expect to see. It's rare but not impossible. Some cases of spontaneous recovery are documented in medical literature." "And what's your professional opinion?" "My opinion is that your daughter is in a phase of natural recovery. Slow, gradual, but real. I recommend intensive physical therapy and consistent neurological monitoring. With work, she could regain much of her mobility." Dr. Richard hung up the phone and sat in his office for long minutes, processing the information. Margaret had been right. His housekeeper, with no medical training, had noticed something he, with all his expertise, had missed. More than that, she had started a recovery process while he had been lost in his own pain and guilt. The weight of realization hit him like an avalanche. That afternoon, Dr. Richard came home earlier than usual. He found Sophia in her usual spot, sitting in her wheelchair, looking out the window, and Margaret in the kitchen, preparing dinner. "Sophia," he said, approaching his daughter, "I need to talk to you." The girl turned, her eyes still heavy with the sadness that had returned in recent days. "Did the test results come in, Dad?" "They did. And you know what? Aunt Maggie was right all along." Sophia's eyes lit up for the first time in days. "What do you mean?" "The tests show you're getting better, sweetheart. Slowly, but you're improving, and that means the exercises you were doing were exactly what you needed." Doctor Richard knelt in front of the wheelchair and took his daughter's hands. "Sophia, I want to apologize. I'm sorry for not believing in you, for not paying enough attention to what you were feeling, and for being such an absent father these past few months." "Dad!" Sophia began to cry, but this time they were tears of relief. "I was so afraid of being disappointed again that I missed the chance to celebrate your victories. But that changes today, okay?" Margaret, who had overheard the conversation from the kitchen, appeared in the doorway with teary eyes. "Doctor, can I say something?" she asked. "Of course, Margaret. And actually, I owe you an apology too." "No need, Doctor. You were protecting your daughter the best way you knew how. But I wanted to say that Sophia made so much progress because she felt she had a purpose, a hope. When we stopped the exercises, it wasn't just her body that stopped improving. Her spirit did too." "Doctor," Richard nodded, fully understanding what Margaret meant. "Then let's start the exercises again," he said, "but this time I want to be part of it too. I want to learn. I want to be present. I want to be part of my daughter's recovery." "Really, Daddy?" Sophia asked, barely able to contain her emotion. "Really. Starting tomorrow, I'll work part-time at the hospital. The other half of my time will be dedicated to you. We'll do physical therapy together. We'll do Aunt Maggie's exercises. We'll do whatever it takes for you to get better." That night, for the first time in months, the Mitchell family home had a joyful dinner. Dr. Richard Mitchell shared funny stories from the hospital. Sophia laughed at her father's jokes, and Margaret Johnson smiled as she watched the family reconnecting. "Aunt Maggie," Sophia said before bedtime, "tomorrow, can you teach me that standing exercise again?" "Of course, sweetheart. And now with your daddy joining us, it'll be even better." "Daddy?" Sophia turned to her father. "Do you promise that even when I'm completely better, you won't just spend all day at the hospital?" Dr. Richard felt his heart tighten. His daughter had put into words the exact fear Margaret had identified. "I promise, sweetheart. In fact, you know what I was thinking? How about we start doing things together on weekends? We can go to the park, the movies, do those things we used to do with Mommy." The mention of her mother brought a pang of longing, but this time it wasn't paralyzing. It was a longing that encouraged them to live. The months that followed were transformative for the whole family. Dr. Richard kept his promise and drastically reduced his hours at the hospital. He hired specialized physical therapists who worked alongside Margaret, creating a personalized recovery plan for Sophia. Progress was slow but steady. Each week, Sophia could stand a little longer, take a few more supported steps, and regain more feeling in her legs. More importantly, she was rediscovering the joy of living. Dr. Richard discovered aspects of fatherhood he'd lost. He learned to play again, to be patient, to celebrate small victories. He realized being a father wasn't just about providing and protecting, it was about being present, listening, and supporting. Margaret in turn became far more than a housekeeper. She was an integral part of the family, a second mother to Sophia, a wise counselor to Dr. Richard. Her intuition and dedication hadn't just saved Sophia's mobility, but the entire family dynamic. Then, on a Saturday morning 3 months after resuming therapy, the most emotional moment arrived. Dr. Richard and Margaret were in the garden with Sophia during their daily physical therapy session. "Daddy, I want to try something," Sophia said. "What do you want to try, sweetheart?" "I want to try walking by myself, without support." Dr. Richard's heart raced, but this time not from fear but anticipation. "Are you sure you want to try?" "I am, but if I fall, you'll catch me, right?" "Always, sweetheart," Margaret said. "We'll always be here to catch you." Sophia carefully rose from her wheelchair. She stood for a few seconds, taking deep breaths, focusing. Then, slowly, she took her first step. Her right foot moved steadily, then her left. Another step, then another. Dr. Richard and Margaret held back tears as they watched Sophia walk slowly toward them. It was only 5 steps, but the 5 most important steps in that family's life. When Sophia finally reached her father's and Margaret's arms, they all cried together, embracing, celebrating a victory that had seemed impossible months before. "I did it," Sophia shouted. "I walked." "You did, my sweetheart," Dr. Richard said, kissing her forehead. "You're the bravest girl in the world." "It wasn't just me," said Sophia, looking at Margaret Johnson. "It was Aunt Maggie who believed in me when no one else did." "And it was your daddy who learned to be a present father," Margaret added. "We did this together." From that day on, Sophia's recovery accelerated significantly. With her confidence restored and full emotional support, she made more progress in 2 weeks than she had in 2 months. Dr. Richard Mitchell, inspired by his daughter's transformation and Margaret's example, made a decision that would change his career. He created a program at the hospital for children with injuries similar to Sophia's, focusing not only on medical treatment, but also on emotional and family support. "Margaret," he said one evening, as they watched Sophia play in the garden, "I'd like to make you an offer." "What kind of offer, doctor?" "I want you to lead the family support program at the hospital. You have an intuition, a sensitivity that no medical school can teach. You could help other families like you helped ours." Margaret fell silent for a few moments, moved by the proposal. "Doctor, I don't have an education. I don't have a degree. You have something far more valuable than degrees, Margaret. You have genuine love, true dedication, and wisdom that comes from the heart. That's exactly what other families need." And so it was. Margaret accepted the offer and became the coordinator of the Hope in Motion program, which she helped develop herself. The program combined traditional medical treatment with intensive emotional support, including family therapy, recreational activities, and what Margaret called heart exercises, small activities that strengthened family bonds while aiding physical recovery. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. 6 months after the day Dr. Richard Mitchell discovered the secret exercises, Sophia wasn't just walking, she was running through the garden. Her recovery became a case study at the hospital, an example of how love, dedication, and hope can overcome the darkest prognoses. The girl returned to school, made new friends, and resumed activities she had abandoned. Most importantly, she regained confidence in herself and in the love of those around her. Dr. Richard Mitchell became a completely different father. He was still a respected and skilled doctor, but now he was also a present, caring father involved in his daughter's life. He learned that professional success means nothing if you lose your family in the process. Margaret continued living with the family, now as an integral part of it. Sophia called her second mum, and Dr. Richard considered her a sister. She divided her time between caring for the Mitchells' home and coordinating the hospital program, where she had already helped dozens of other families. It was on a Sunday evening, nearly a year after the journey began, that Dr. Richard had a special conversation with Sophia. "Sweetheart, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Daddy." "What do you think would have happened if Aunt Maggie hadn't insisted on the exercises?" Sophia thought for a few seconds before answering. "I think I'd still be in a wheelchair, Daddy. Not just because my body wouldn't have gotten better, but because my heart wouldn't have either." "What do you mean?" "When Mommy left, I thought you'd leave me too. So I thought if I stayed sick, you'd stay with me forever. But then Aunt Maggie taught me that love doesn't work that way, that people who love us stay because they want to, not because we need them." Dr. Richard felt his eyes fill with tears. Her 9-year-old daughter had understood something many adults take a lifetime to learn. "And do you believe it now? That I stay with you because I want to?" "I do, Daddy, because you proved it to me. You changed your whole life to stay with me, even when I was already getting better. And you know it will always be like that, right? That no matter what happens, you'll always be the most important thing in my life." "I know, Daddy. And you know what? I think Mommy knows it too, from heaven. And I think she's proud of how we helped each other get better again." That night, Dr. Richard Mitchell went to bed with a heart full of gratitude. Gratitude for having such a wise and brave daughter. Gratitude for having a friend like Margaret Johnson. Gratitude for having learned to be a real father before it was too late. The Hope in Motion program continued to grow and help families across the state of Los Angeles. Margaret became a minor celebrity in the medical field, invited to give talks where she shared Sophia's story and taught other professionals about the importance of emotional support in the healing process. Dr. Richard Mitchell wrote scientific articles about his daughter's case, always giving full credit to Margaret for the recovery. He had learned that medicine isn't just about diagnoses and procedures, but about understanding the whole human being, body, mind, and spirit. Sophia, in turn, grew up determined to help other children like her. Still very young, she already showed an interest in medicine, inspired by her father and her own recovery story. She often visited the hospital with Margaret, talking to other children in recovery and showing them that hope is always worth it. The Mitchell family home, once silent and sad, had become a place full of life, laughter, and love. Mornings began with family breakfasts, afternoons were dedicated to activities together, and evenings ended with stories and loving conversations. Dr. Richard Mitchell never again worked late without a very important reason. He learned that being present in his daughter's life was more rewarding than any successful surgery. He discovered the joy of helping with homework, watching cartoons, and listening to Sophia's stories about her day at school. Margaret became a maternal figure, not just for Sophia, but for dozens of children who went through the hospital's program. Her simple yet effective approach, combining physical exercises with love and attention, revolutionized how the hospital treated neurological recovery cases. 2 years after the journey began, at Sophia's birthday party in the backyard, Dr. Richard Mitchell gave an emotional speech to the friends and family present. "I'd like to take this special moment to talk about miracles," he said, with Sophia running around the yard in the background. 2 years ago, I thought miracles only happened in medical textbooks, rare cases that defied science. Today, I know miracles happen every day when courageous people refuse to give up hope." He looked at Margaret, who was sitting at a nearby table, smiling. Sophia's miracle didn't just happen because her body healed. It happened because an extraordinary woman believed in her when even I, her own father, couldn't. It happened because true love, unconditional love, has a healing power no medicine can replicate. Sophia stopped playing and ran to hug her father. "Daddy, can I say something too?" "Of course, sweetheart. I want to thank everyone here for helping me get better, but most of all I want to thank Aunt Maggie, who never gave up on me, and my daddy, who learned to be the best dad in the world." There wasn't a dry eye at the party. The transformation of that family had touched everyone present, showing that sometimes the most beautiful stories are the ones that happen right beside us, when someone has the courage to make a difference. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly neighbor who had first alerted Margaret Johnson about Sophia's emotional state, approached the housekeeper during the party. "My dear," she said, "I knew from the start you'd be able to help that girl. You have a special heart, a gift for caring for people." "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson, but I think anyone who truly loves can work miracles." "No, my sweet. Anyone can love, but not everyone has the courage to act on that love, especially when everyone else is saying it's impossible. You had that courage." Margaret smiled, watching Sophia play with her school friends. The girl was unrecognizable compared to the apathetic, sad child she had met 2 years earlier. Now Sophia ran, jumped, laughed, dreamed. She lived fully. "You know, Mrs. Thompson," Margaret said, "I think Sophia taught me just as much as I taught her. She showed me we should never give up on the people we love, even when everything seems lost." "And Dr. Richard Mitchell? How is he now?" "Completely changed. He's become a present, loving, involved father. And at the hospital, he's revolutionizing how they treat children, all because he learned that medicine isn't just about healing the body, it's about healing the whole person." As the night went on and the party neared its end, Dr. Mitchell approached Margaret for a private conversation. "Margaret, I'll never be able to thank you enough for what you've done for our family. Doctor, there's no need to thank me. I just did what anyone who loves would do." "No, you did much more than that. You gave my daughter back to me, and me back to my daughter. You taught us how to be a real family." "The family was already here, Doctor. It just needed a little care to bloom again." Dr. Mitchell smiled, watching Sophia help put away the party toys. "You know what I admire most about you, Margaret? You never doubted, not even for a second, that Sophia would get better. Even when I, with all my medical training, had given up, you kept believing." "Well, I've learned something important in life, Doctor. When you truly love someone, you don't see limitations. You see possibilities." That phrase echoed in Dr. Mitchell's mind for a long time. He later used it in his medical lectures, always crediting the wisdom to Margaret. The Hope in Motion program continued to grow, helping not just children with neurological injuries, but families facing all kinds of medical challenges. The holistic approach developed by Dr. Mitchell and Margaret became a national model, replicated in hospitals across the country. Sophia, now 11, became one of the program's biggest advocates. She often shared her story with other families, encouraging children never to give up hope. "When I was in a wheelchair," she'd say in her little talks, "I thought my life was over. But Aunt Maggie taught me that our lives never end. They just sometimes change direction. And sometimes that new direction can be even better than the old one." Dr. Mitchell always got emotional hearing his daughter speak. The wisdom and maturity she'd gained through her recovery journey were remarkable for someone so young. One day, during one of Sophia's hospital visits, a mother approached Margaret with tears in her eyes. "Miss Johnson," the woman said, "my son is in the same condition your daughter was in. The doctors say he'll never walk again. But after hearing your story, I want to believe it's possible." "Of course it's possible," replied Margaret Johnson, holding the woman's hands. "Every case is unique. Every child is special. But what I can promise you is that with love, dedication, and a lot of patience, miracles can happen." "But what if it doesn't? What if my son never walks?" Margaret smiled tenderly. "Then you'll learn to be happy in a different way. Because true recovery isn't just about walking or not walking. It's about learning to live with joy, purpose, and love. And that, my dear, is possible for any child in any condition." Those words became one of the pillars of the program. The idea that recovery goes beyond physical function, encompassing emotional, familial, and spiritual healing. Dr. Richard Mitchell, inspired by this philosophy, wrote a book about his experience with Sophia, titled When Love Heals, A Journey of Family Recovery. The book became a bestseller, with all proceeds going to the hospital's program. 3 years after the journey began, on a sunny Saturday afternoon, Dr. Richard Mitchell, Sophia, and Margaret were in the backyard of their home, having a picnic. It was a tradition they'd created. Every Saturday was dedicated to being together, no work, no obligations, just enjoying each other's company. "Daddy," Sophia said, lying on the grass, "do you remember what our life was like before?" "I do, sweetheart. Why?" "Sometimes I wonder if all that had to happen for us to learn how to be truly happy." Dr. Richard and Margaret exchanged glances. The depth of Sophia's reflections always amazed them. "What do you think, Princess?" "I think sometimes life has to knock us down so we can learn to get up the right way. And I think we needed to go through all that to discover what really matters." "And what really matters?" Margaret asked. "Being together, taking care of each other, believing in each other, and never ever giving up on the people we love." In that moment, Dr. Richard knew his daughter had learned life's most important lessons, not just about physical recovery, but about human resilience, about the transformative power of love. The Mitchell family home became a place of pilgrimage for families facing similar struggles. Dr. Richard and Margaret welcomed visitors from across the country, sharing their story and offering hope. Sophia always joined these conversations, telling her version of events with the ease of someone who'd turned trauma into wisdom. "The most important thing I've learned," she'd say, "is that a miracle isn't just when something impossible happens. A miracle is when people love each other so much they make the impossible happen." 5 years after that first afternoon, when Margaret noticed the small movements in Sophia's feet, the girl was turning 15. The celebration was held at the hospital, so all the families in the program could attend. Dr. Richard gave an emotional speech, reflecting on their journey. "5 years ago, I thought I'd lost my daughter forever, not because she'd lost the ability to walk, but because I'd lost the ability to be a father. Today, looking at her, I don't just see a healthy, happy teenager. I see a young woman who learned life's most important lessons before even turning 15. He turned to Margaret. "And that was only possible because an extraordinary woman taught us that true love never gives up, even when all logic says to quit." Sophia stepped up to the microphone. "I want to thank everyone who's been part of our story. But most of all, I want to thank 2 people. My father, who learned to be the best dad in the world when I needed him most, and my Aunt Maggie, who taught me that nothing is impossible when you have love and courage." The audience rose in applause. There were doctors, nurses, patients, families, and local officials, all moved by the story of that family, who had turned tragedy into hope. Margaret Johnson, now a respected figure in the medical field, had been invited to give lectures at medical schools, teaching future doctors about the importance of holistic care. "Medicine isn't just science," she would say in her talks. "It's science with humanity, it's technique with love, it's knowledge with compassion." Dr. Richard Mitchell always accompanied her to these lectures, complementing the technical aspects with his personal experience. "I learned that being a doctor isn't just about curing diseases," he would say. "It's about healing people. And to heal people, we need to understand not just their bodies, but their hearts, their families, their fears, their hopes." The Hope in Motion program had already helped over 1,000 families with recovery rates that impressed the international medical community. But the numbers were only part of the story. The true measure of success lay in the rebuilt families, the children who smiled again, the parents who learned to hope. One Sunday afternoon, 6 years after it all began, Dr. Richard Mitchell found an old photo album while organizing his office. The first pictures showed little Sophia in her mother's arms, beaming with joy. Then came the photos from the first months after the accident, Sophia in a wheelchair, her eyes empty and sad. But the most recent photos told a completely different story. Teenage Sophia playing sports at school, traveling with her father and Margaret, helping other children at the hospital, living a full and happy life. "Daddy?" Sophia appeared at the office door. "What are you doing?" "Looking at old photos and thinking about how much our lives have changed." Sophia sat beside her father and flipped through the album. "You know what amazes me most about these pictures?" she said. "What?" "That in the photos from when I was in the wheelchair, I wasn't just sad because I couldn't walk. I was sad because I felt alone. And in the pictures now, I'm happy not just because I can walk, but because I know I'm loved." Dr. Richard hugged his daughter, moved by her wisdom. "Sophia, can I tell you a secret?" "Of course, Daddy." "Aunt Maggie didn't just save you. She saved our whole family. She taught me how to be a better father, taught us how to be a real family." "I know, Daddy. And you know what's even better? Now we help other families discover that too." Just then, Margaret appeared at the door. "Are you two in here talking about old photos?" she said, smiling. "Aunt Maggie." Sophia jumped up to hug her. "We were just talking about how you changed our lives." "Nonsense," Margaret said. "You're the ones who changed mine. You gave me a family, a purpose, a chance to make a difference." "And now you make a difference in hundreds of families' lives," Dr. Richard added. "We do," Margaret corrected, "because this is teamwork, always has been, always will be." That conversation in the office became one of the family's most cherished memories. It was the perfect summary of their entire journey. A caregiver who refused to give up, a doctor who learned to be a father, a girl who discovered her own strength, and a family rebuilt through love. Years passed, and the Mitchell family's story continued to inspire people across the country. Sophia graduated from medical school, following in her father's footsteps, but with the sensitivity and compassion she had learned from Margaret. Dr. Richard became a national reference in compassionate medicine, writing books, giving lectures, and training a new generation of doctors who understood the importance of holistic care. Margaret Johnson received numerous awards and recognition, but remained the same humble and dedicated person she had always been. Her greatest joy was seeing families rebuild, children recover, and love triumph over adversity. On the wall of the Hope in Motion program office, there was a framed quote that summed up the philosophy guiding the team's work. "When love refuses to give up, the impossible becomes possible." These words, written by Sophia when she was just 12 years old, became the motto not only of the program, but of an entirely new medical approach spreading across the country. The story of a housekeeper who believed in the impossible, a father who learned to love truly, and a girl who discovered the strength within herself proved that the greatest miracles happen when ordinary people do extraordinary things motivated by love. The end. Now tell me what you thought of this heartwarming story of overcoming adversity. Have you or someone you know experienced something similar? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more touching stories. Thank you for joining me.